Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining our final Healthy Soils for Healthy Waters webinar, focusing on agricultural management practices and data usage for soil health. I'm Katie DeMiro with Greenleaf Communities, a sustainability nonprofit focusing on healthy soils, sustainable water, and climate change. We've organized 6 Healthy Soils for Healthy Waters workshops and symposiums in the past on integrated whole systems management practices for sustainable agriculture, bringing together researchers, farmers, industry, and government people to address the best practices and technology in the area. Back in March, we hosted a workshop in conjunction with the University of Illinois. And I also would like to thank Nancy Holm, who was on as one of our co-organizers. That was focused on sensing technologies and applications to soil health. We're also continuing this effort and looking at measuring and monitoring carbon sequestration through regenerative agricultural practices. Please reach out to me. I'll share my email, and you should have it from registration if you'd have any interest in discussing that with us on the carbon sequestration and regenerative ag practices. I would also like to thank the Lumpkin Family Foundation for supporting our workshop in March, and then also this webinar series. I'll share a couple links here. You can see previous webinars. We had Dr. Maria Berngen earlier this month, and Mitchell Curtis, a farmer in Illinois as well. There's my email and the link. So today we welcome Dr. Jennie Atkins. Dr. Atkins manages the Water and Atmospheric Resources Monitoring Program at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. The program consists of 4 long-term monitoring networks that collect data on Illinois weather, water, and soil. Jennie, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Katie. And thank you all for having me here today. Let me pull up the presentation. Okay, you got it?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay. Well, thank you all for having me here today. As Katie said, I run the Water and Atmospheric Resources Monitoring Program, or WARM, at the University of Illinois' Illinois State Water Survey. You might be more familiar, though, with our networks, one being the Illinois Climate Network, and we have stations around the state where we monitor weather and soil parameters, including soil moisture. And today I'm going to talk about soil moisture, how we collect data, to what tools are out there for people, and the benefits and the drawbacks from the tools that are there. So hopefully we can generate some discussion. I'm hoping to get some information from you about what tools you want and what you would like in the future to help us also better serve you. So let's start with soil moisture. Soil moisture, the more we learn about it, the more we understand how complicated it can be to measure it, to understand it, but also how useful it can be. And we're finding that soil moisture can be used in a lot of applications, from helping us forecast the weather, to forecasting droughts and predicting floods and droughts and understanding them, in our water supply research, as well as climate research, and also understanding human health concerns, especially as they pertain to climate and weather. But today, the main emphasis is going to be talking about agriculture. How do we use soil moisture in agriculture? From the individual farmer who's using soil moisture data to planned field work, to look at, determine when to irrigate, to look at crop health, to agricultural researchers, extension officers who are looking at crop yields and how things are changing over time. So soil moisture is incredibly useful in a lot of different ways, but it can be complicated to use. So let's start with talking about how exactly we measure soil moisture. And soil moisture measurements can be easy, as you can estimate soil moisture by feel and appearance. This is a brochure from the USDA giving you information on how to do that. You pick up a soil sample, you squeeze it a few times to form a loose ball, and then you look at the soil texture, you look at the firmness of the ball. Do you see any water glistening? There are several things that you're supposed to look at. You can compare it to the photos that the USDA provides. And this may seem like a very simple way, and it is, but it's also pretty accurate. If you know what you're doing and you follow the rules and all of that stuff, they're looking at accuracies of about 5%. So it's very easy. Anyone can do this, and you can get information right away. That being said, it's really difficult to see long-term trends unless you are going to go out and collect soil samples every hour, every half hour to see how it changes. It's a little bit difficult. And also, I mean, it's a little bit difficult to look at it over a large area. The Illinois DOA, Department of Agriculture, says the average farm in Illinois is over 300 acres. If you have 300 acres, you can't go and be squeezing soil every day to find out how soil moisture is changing over all 300 acres. So this gives us a very good estimate, but it's perhaps not good in looking at how things are changing long term. One of the easiest ways of looking at it, well, other way of looking at it is the gravimetric water content. And this is where you go and you collect the sample and you dry it. And you dry it for a day or two at 105 degrees Celsius, and you look at the weight of the dry soil versus the weight of the wet soil. Now, this is a very accurate way of looking at soil moisture. It's also a very resource and time-consuming way of looking at soil moisture. You don't get the results back for a couple of days generally. That being said, this is one of the more consistent ways of looking at it over different types of analysts, which is why some groups, such as COCORAS, a volunteer monitoring program, the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, actually recommends this for the volunteers. And they are getting some information, but as I said, it's pretty resource intensive, so there are limitations to this. Another way is in situ monitoring. These are some probes that are most commonly used by in situ networks. Essentially, we take these probes and we bury them underground and we leave them there. For some of these probes, we've had in the ground for 5 years or more. And it gives reliable information. It can give near real-time information because we're able to collect information from every 30 minutes to every hour. And it provides, a lot of good information, especially when we're looking at trends and how things are changing in relation to things such as precipitation or air temperature, stuff such as this. That being said, these probes, each one costs several $100s. The Stevens Hydro probe, which we use at the Illinois Climate Network, costs slightly over $400. So if we're looking at the soil column and we have 6 probes, we're talking over $2,500 just to look at soil moisture at one site, which they are reliable for a network. For us, that makes sense, perhaps not for an individual user. It depends on exactly what your needs are. There's also the fact that the soil moisture sensors that you're seeing here have cables on them, which is fine for the networks. But if you're a farmer, that does limit what you can put in your field. But so it's reliable, but expensive. Even more expensive, though, are satellites. This is the one where you see most of the data being used from, the NASA Soil Moisture Active Passive Satellite, or SMAP for short. This is a satellite run from NASA that measures land surface, the top 2 inches of soil depth, soil moisture, as well as whether the soil is frozen or not. So it tells us that information. It covers the entire globe every 2 to 3 days. So you get a lot of information from here. It covers a lot of area. It uses 2 different instruments, the radiometer, which is the passive instrument, and the radar, which is the active instrument. And it's providing us a lot of global information on soil moisture, which researchers are using to find out a lot of different things. So there are several ways you can actually obtain soil moisture data, but how is this data presented to the general public? And there are several ways. One that you're probably most familiar with is the USDA Crop Progress Condition Report. And these are reports that come out weekly during the growing season. And they have volunteers across the nation that are going to fields and sending the information back to the USDA. So they have 4 categories for soil moisture, starting with surplus. That just basically means it's wet. Fields are muddy. You may see some yellowing of crops due to excess moisture. Then there's adequate. Adequate soil moisture, things are good. Soil is moist, you have normal crop growth and development. Then when you get into short, you're getting dry. Basically, soils are dry. You're getting to see normal crop growth and development curtail. And very short, it is quite frankly very dry. And that is when you're seeing growth and development has mainly stopped, and you're beginning to see some visible signs of plant stress. So this is probably this type you're most familiar with, and it's been around for a very long time. Also, the National Weather Service Climate Prediction Center, they use hydrologic modeling to calculate soil moisture across the US, looking at both total soil moisture as well as where it, at changes we've seen. It provides broad national and regional coverage. But with that, it's very hard to see localized impacts. I mean, what's happening here in Champaign or Northern Illinois, you sort of get an idea, but you know, it can be difficult, but it does provide very good information nationally and regionally. And then there's the National Soil Moisture Network. This is a group that used to be out of Texas A&M, is currently out of Ohio State. And on their website, they provide maps such as this one that uses the satellite data that I mentioned earlier to give national and regional maps to see how things have changed. One of the ways, though, to get best way to get localized information, though, are the in situ measurements. This is a map from the National Soil Moisture Network, which gives you a pretty good idea of where localized soil moisture monitoring is being done around the nation. It's not complete. These are groups that worked with the National Soil Moisture Network. So it does leave out some networks, such as in Indiana, the Indiana Water Balance Network, but it does give you a pretty good idea of coverage. And you can see where we have a lot of coverage, such as in Oklahoma and California, and where we have very little coverage, such as in Minnesota, up there in Wisconsin. So it really depends on where you are. If you're located next to, near a network, near a station, as to how useful this information is to you. But there is quite a bit in situ measurements across the nation. In Illinois, we have the Illinois Climate Network, which has 19 stations around the state, which is measuring soil moisture from 2 inches down to 5 feet. And we've been measuring this since the early 80s, so we have more than 30 years worth of data. And so there's a lot of information there if you are interested in that. Now, we do have these networks, but we have different ways that we present the soil moisture data to our users. So I'm just going to go over a few right now, give you an idea of what's out there. Now, this is from the University of Georgia Weather Network out of Athens, Georgia. And this is one of the most common ways that networks present soil moisture data. They're looking at it as a percentage. So if you're looking down at Savannah, where we have those 3 markers reading 13, 25, 24, you can see that, you know, we're seeing 13%, 25%, 24% soil moisture there. And that's good information. They update it daily so we can see how it's changing. But what exactly does that mean? So, I mean, 24% soil moisture. If you're in sand, that means you're flooded. You're way over. If you're in clay, it means something different than you're in silt loam. So this information, it does give you some information, but it doesn't give you enough unless you really know the area. And I'm going to show our own map from the Illinois Climate Network to show why that's an issue. If you look at the map, you can see over in Mason County, you see a 0.03. We have a map in water fraction by volume. It's pretty much the same thing as percentage. We just show it in decimals. And with that, I had a reporter contact me one day, very interested in what was happening over in Mason County because its soil moisture was so much lower than everyone across the state. But anyone who's from Illinois, well, who's familiar with the area knows that Mason County is essentially sand. And so 0.03, that's normal in that area. So it's not anything interesting. And the reporter was a bit disappointed he didn't get a story out of it. But that's why not knowing the area can make this information that we present on these maps a little bit confusing. So another way that we presented that on the Illinois Climate Network pages is looking at trends. We have individual station pages where you can see what's been happening over the last week at each of the 6 levels we look at for soil moisture. And on this one, you can see that soil moisture has been decreasing in the Peoria station at the 2, 4, and 8 inch range of depths over the last week, but has been relatively stable at 40 and 60 inches. You can also click on the map to see more historical data, such as what's been happening over this growing season. You know, we start out in Peoria with quite high soil moisture, so lots of rain. We had drying periods in June, July, but especially into the August period. So the trends can give you a bit more information about what's happening. And, you know, that's one of the ways that we present soil moisture. Another way you'll see it presented, this is from the South Dakota Mesonet. Nathan Edwards, the manager of that network, likes to call this his coin map. And that's because he has, you know, different coins, each coin representing a different depth from 2 inches down to 40 inches. And how he's presenting this is looking at the inches of water per inch of soil. This is probably quite familiar to farmers. You also see it represented in inches of water per foot of soil. This is just a simple calculation from the percentage to give you this information. And so you can look at this and by the different colors. Let's look at this one down here. We see it's orange at the 2 inches. That means that it's incredibly dry down there. I'm not familiar with South Dakota, so I don't know what's in that area. But you can look at other ones, such as the dark blue here at 40 inches, which means it's 0.5 inches of water or more per inch of soil. So it's pretty wet in that area. So this gives you an idea of how things are through the whole depth, just looking at the map, and puts it in terms I think is more familiar to farmers. But one of the absolute best ways to present soil moisture data is done by the Oklahoma Mesonet, which is unsurprising. Those of you who know the Oklahoma Mesonet, they're considered pretty much the gold standard in weather and soil monitoring, but they present soil moisture as plant available water. This is a great way to present it, but to do so, you need some information. You need to know what soil type you're looking at each depth. What soil type at each depth? You need to know soil texture. You need to know information such as the wilting point and field capacity, which is information a lot of networks don't know. And so we here at Illinois are working with the USDA and our CS office to collect soil samples at our stations and have them analyzed by their soil lab over in Lincoln, Nebraska to get this information so we can better present soil moisture data to you. But I mean, we're quite fortunate that the USDA has agreed to do that for us for free. Otherwise, this is quite expensive just to do our network, the 19 stations with 6 steps at each station. We're talking several $1,000s worth of analysis to get that done, which is, you know, can be done for most networks, but it does take a bite out of the budget. And so, but the USDA and NRCS and others, we're beginning to see why we need to do that, and we're working to get this information out to you. So we have quite a few different ways to get data. So what does this mean for farmers? Well, if you're lucky and you live in a state with a network that's looking at soil moisture, you can get near real-time data. And this is from the Illinois Water Balance, Indiana Water Balance Network, their Rushville station. And they're updating their data on their website every hour. So if you want to know how the rainfall you just had impacted soil moisture, you can go to their website and you can find it out. You can see trends. It's not just what happened, an hour ago, half hour ago. You also can see, as we saw earlier, and you can see in this map from the Kentucky Mesonet, you can see what's been happening for the past month. As we're seeing on this graph, you're seeing plots at different depths for the past month. You can also look over the past growing season, the past year, the past 5 years. So it allows you to see trends and how things are changing. Also, we are beginning to see some long-term data sets. As I said, in Illinois, we have over 30 years worth of data, which allows us to understand exactly how soil moisture changes over time, and if the soil moisture we're seeing this year is abnormal. Are we more, so it allows us to understand that, hey, we typically do see dryness across the state in August. Or, this is abnormally wet, or we're getting more, wetter springs, and we're seeing that in soil moisture. So by having a long-term data set, we can see how things are changing, and we can help farmers and other agriculture researchers, as well as educators, understand how things are changing and to, develop plans to work with those changes. Also, with this in situ monitoring, it gives a more complete climate snapshot. This is from Washington State University's Ag WeatherNet, and this is at their Arrowhead station in Washington State. And you can see that they collect not only, they collect weather temperature, they collect air temperature, relative humidity, precipitation, wind, soil temperature, soil moisture. And, we need all that information to really understand what's happening. Soil moisture doesn't occur in a bubble. You need precipitation to, increase the soil moisture, air temperature impacts it as to wind. So this gives you a more complete climate snapshot of what's happening, which helps the individual farmers as well as researchers. And this is more of an indirect benefit, but the soil moisture data being collected not just through the in situ networks, but also with satellites and modeling, allows us to better understand what's happening and to develop tools for farmers, whether it's looking at plant diseases, as they are in the South Dakota Extension Program, or developing models for crop yields. And these do help the farmers with the development of these new tools. That being said, not everything's so rosy, let's be honest. There are limitations. There's a limited number of in situ monitoring stations. These stations are not cheap to install and to run. And, so there's a limited number you can install, and getting resources to install more can be difficult. There are some states that don't have any at all. So, it depends on where you're located, whether you're lucky enough to be near a station. And that's very important because soil moisture measurements are very highly localized. What I collect at my station, which is on the edge of field, may not be what you're seeing 100 feet or 500 feet away, because you might have a slightly different elevation. Maybe there's a rise of a foot, which will impact soil moisture. Maybe you have, some different soil types when you go down 20 inches or so. So the soil moisture measurements taken at a station really only tell us what's happening at that station. It can be used to give us general trends to help us understand what's happening, nearby. But you can't, if I say it's, 52% here, that doesn't necessarily mean that same number is going to mean the same to you if you're a mile away. Also, the in situ measurements are taken under sod, or I'll say natural vegetation, which in Illinois is mainly sod, which does not necessarily match what you're going to see if you're in the field. And also, there are limitations to our data presentation. I will say, as a network manager, soil moisture data is probably not the most used data by our users. For our network, the number one parameter maps that are used are soil temperature maps. Then come the weather maps, the air temperature, precipitation. Soil moisture is way down the line. And so we don't expend as many resources in developing tools and presentations from that because we're not hearing the clamor from our users. And so I will agree that we need to work on that as a community, and as an individual network manager. But there is a lot of work currently being done with soil moisture. One of the major things by researchers here at the University of Illinois and other places is to combine the modeling data, the satellite data, in situ measurements to develop highly localized information for farmers. So even to get down to, use all of this to get down to field level. Also, I'm working with a group here, the Illinois State Water Survey, and there are others across the nation and world to develop localized soil forecasts. So not just what's happening today, what happened 30 minutes ago, an hour ago, but what's going to happen 2 days from now or 7 days from now, in order to give farmers, some idea so they can, plan field work or plan irrigation. And the other really big thing is the development of a national soil moisture coordinated network. Let's go back to the map from the National Soil Moisture Network. I know it's confusing, very similar names, but this shows you where there, gives you an idea where there are in situ measurements across the nation, though they are leaving out a few. The National Coordinated Soil Moisture Network is a group being headed up by NIDIS, a group in the US government that looks at drought information, and to work with satellite managers, modelers, in situ monitors, to bring all of this information together to provide a coordinated data set. And so that data set can be used for things such as to look at drought, which is the big thing for NIDIS. That's their bread and butter. But it can also look at flooding. It can also be used for agriculture. It can be used for many different things. So to bring all of us together so we can come up with one national data set to be used for many different ways. And where things are now, NIDIS brought together a large group of people last year to talk about this a lot, about how it would work. And we developed a plan, and the white paper is currently in DC, going under review. At least that's the last thing I heard. And then we'll go from there. But hopefully this will be coming, and you'll be hearing more about it. So that is 12:30, so that is my 30 minutes. Katie, are there any questions? If not, I'm going to open it up to some questions I have for the audience.
Yeah, Jenny, why don't we start with some of these questions, and just a reminder to the audience, if you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you and you can answer these questions that Jenny has.
Okay, so I went through a lot about the soil moisture data that is currently available. So my question really to the audience is, what sort of soil moisture data do you want? I mean, is what is currently available adequate, or do you think we need more? And if we need more, specifically, what would you want?
Anyone from the audience want to chime in? I'll let I'll ask some questions while in the interim, and people can either use the chat box or raise your hand, and I'll monitor that. But Jenny, I guess a question for you. Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. What do you think the best way for farmers to use the soil moisture information that's maybe available to them? How do you see that being useful?
Well, the current soil moisture data that's available to them about all the ones I've spoken about, basically, I think the best way to use it is to look at trends, is to see, what changes we've seen in, the station closest to you. Are we seeing, declines in, the top 6 inches? Are things fine, 20 inches or deeper? How are things changing over time? As I said, you can't do a direct comparison to, what we're seeing here means it's going to be what you're seeing a mile, 20 miles from the station. But the general trends, if we're seeing drying at our station, you're probably seeing drying, a mile away.
And a kind of follow on to that question, you were talking about some of the historical information that's available and how that can be used to look at long-term trends. Are there any trends that you've noticed either in Illinois or nationally with this data and the network?
One of the things we're seeing in Illinois are wetter springs. And, we're seeing that with precipitation. It's also showing up in soil moisture. And that is impacting field work. We hear it's almost common to hear, year from year now that, field work has been delayed in some areas of the state simply because of excess moisture. And so those are changes we're seeing.
That is, seems to be similar in some other areas in the Midwest as well, from what we've heard from farmers also. So, but it's good to have that data and that information just to kind of verify that.
It is. I mean, you can get a lot from, just talking to the farmers because they know what's happening in their area better than anyone else. But having the quantitative data is very helpful in, doing the long-term research and developing tools and plans for how to deal with it. Okay.
Great.
I was seeing we have a question from Nancy. Is it mainly funding that has limited states such as Wisconsin and Minnesota from having monitoring sites? Also, is the hope that federal government would fund more sites from the national network? Which agency would oversee that? Soil moisture is monitoring, at least for the state and regional networks, has generally not been the driving force for developing these networks and for developing stations. Mesonettes are generally, in general, historically have been developed for 2 reasons. Either looking at severe weather, as they were in Kentucky and Oklahoma, or looking at agriculture, as they were in Washington State and Illinois. And so the main concerns were getting the weather parameters, looking at wind, looking at, precipitation, air temperature, and getting that information. The ag networks, you were beginning to see more soil parameters coming earlier than the severe weather. But basically, soil moisture monitoring has always followed behind the rest of the monitoring. So in Wisconsin and Minnesota, Wisconsin itself does not have a network, but Michigan next door has EnviroWeather. And Wisconsin is working with the Michigan network to bring more stations into Michigan. EnviroWeather has stations in Door County, so the arm of Wisconsin that sticks out to the lake, and they're currently in negotiations with them to add more stations in Wisconsin. Once again, though, EnviroWeather is mainly there to look at, agriculture, specialty crops. So for them, soil moisture isn't as mainly big of a concern. But if there is some funding that comes from the federal government or others, we could find ways to monitor it if we do have some funding. So there is hope that the National Coordinated Soil Moisture Network would help us fund more sites, fund more monitoring. I'm not certain if any of you are familiar with the National Mesonet program. It's a program that's come out of NOAA in the last 10 years or so that's brought together networks such as the Illinois Climate Network to bring together all of our data into one big data set that's used by the National Weather Service for weather forecasting. And with that, each network that's involved gets some money. It's not enough to cover the network, but it does help tremendously. And with that, with the money coming in, that's helped us upgrade here in Illinois to meet the standards. You know, the reason why we're doing 5-minute weather monitoring now is because of the money we got from this program. So the thought is that if we come up with something very similar practice for the National Coordinated Soil Moisture Network, yes, there would be funds to help us do more monitoring and also help us to coordinate the monitoring so that what we're doing in South Dakota is the same with what we're doing in Illinois, the same what we're doing in Georgia. As to what agency would oversee it, that is the question right now. There are several agencies in the US that would love to oversee it. If it comes out, that's unknown at this time. Okay, do wind turbine companies share data on wind and weather? Do they monitor that a lot in states with large number of turbines? I am not familiar with wind turbine companies sharing data on wind and weather. They have come to us to ask for data, but if they are collecting data themselves, and I'd be very surprised if they weren't, they're not making it well known and sharing the information.
Thanks, Jenny. And I'm going to make this next question kind of expand on it, but what can be done to make the information more accessible to farmers? And then also how can, I know we have some extension agents on, how can they support farmers in their region with this data or others who are working with farmers directly?
Well, I think the main issue with the networks is that we're just not presenting the data in a very informative way. We're using the easiest thing, which is percentage or water fraction by volume, which, unless you know the area, doesn't give you much information. You can look at trends over time, but you need a lot of information to go with it that unfortunately the networks aren't providing. So the networks need to provide the data in a more accessible way. And to that, we need to understand what the farmers are looking for in this information. So what extension educators, they could help us out. They understand the farmers, they understand, how best to present the data. I think we need to have more communication between extension and, the mesonets, the networks that are doing the monitoring to find out what the needs are, but also information about how they themselves are using the data and, to give us information to let us present it in a better form so it's more usable to everyone.
Very good. I think that's important, and a goal of our Healthy Soils work is to bring together those parties who maybe aren't getting together as much as would be useful and beneficial for regenerative and sustainable agriculture. So thanks for something that we can work on.
Okay.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay, anyone else questions or comments? You can use the chat box or the Q&A, and I'm going to pull up where, Jenny, I'm going to switch for one second and share some links. So everyone who has joined, thank you everyone, and thank you of course Jenny for the great presentation today, very useful information. Everyone who's joined, you'll receive an email with a recording of the presentation. It will also be posted on our website and the link here. I will also share the links that are in the chat box from Jennie on some of the materials and she discussed during her presentation. So unless we have additional questions, I'd like to thank everyone, all the participants, and Jennie, thank you. Any last minute kind of closing thoughts or comments from you?
Just please take a look at the links, see what's out there, and let's start a conversation if we can.
Well, thank you. And please, you can either, Jennie, they should have your contact. I'll make sure it's available, or I can connect if people would like to start a discussion.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.